It's very interesting. Let's start again. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Balandino Di Donato, a young researcher, lecturer in interactive audio. So we are very interested in knowing much more about this specific issue at Edinburgh Napier University, Scotland. I hope the pronounce it's correct. So we will discover something regarding Scottish mountain soundscapes. We are very, very interested in having an idea about similarities between Scottish mountain soundscapes and Valle Camonica or Italian mountain soundscapes. So it's up to you. Thank you very much. And I hope after the seminar there will be questions and so on. Please, it's up to you.
Good. Thank you, everyone. So it's a great honor to be here for me. Yeah, I mean, I can start off even from some commonalities actually about the environment, the sound environment that I get, that I listen to when I'm in Scotland and what I did here in the past few days here. And yesterday we had a great sound walk as well here in the woods just behind here the university. And definitely one of the things that we don't have much in Scotland, or I never heard yet, was the sound of the wood creaking of the red pine, because there are some areas that are the red pines. There are in some areas there are patches where it's dying, and there was the dry wood creaking. That it was a very characteristic wood sound of the biodiversity and the whole ecology of that specific area of the wood, which was very interesting, to be honest. And for me, that I'm no botanist or no researcher about trees or plants, it was way much more meaningful for me to hear about the wood creaking, moving, and the sound of the wood, to actually assess that the trees were not healthy, rather than looking at them, because my education comes from sound, so I pay more attention to that rather than looking at a tree, for example. So that for me, and it was interesting how my assessment of the tree through sounds, and the students' assessment of the trees by looking at the tree, by looking at the leaves, and the trunk of the tree, and many other aspects. So that was something that really kind of was incredibly interesting yesterday, to kind of have this dialogue with botanists and future botanists, and my perception of the sound of the trees. And unfortunately, I didn't have much to go in many other areas, but I'm sure there are many other areas where I could pick different sounds that could tell me way much more of the habitat and the ecosystem of the surrounding areas here in Edolo. And yeah, so this was kind of to pick up on that invite to talk about the soundscapes around here. And another one, which is not quite common in Scotland, is to hear cricket at sunset. When I first arrived the first evening, I went for a walk, and I could hear crickets everywhere. In Scotland, it's very rare to have sunset with crickets, which I'm not entirely sure what's the reason, or if it's a reason for the ecosystem or the temperature, environmental conditions, but that's something that really caught my attention, because when I was back living in Italy, it was something common that I could hear every evening, but instead in Scotland is something I don't hear. And I noticed just yesterday this lack of, on my daily soundscape, the lack of hearing crickets, which was incredibly interesting to me. And yeah, so I could start with the slides. So I dive into are they on already? Okay. Okay. So, so yeah, today I'll talk about a quick introduction about soundscape studies. For those that are not familiar with it, what do we mean by a soundscape, the application of soundscape studies, and the way to evaluate soundscapes and some current challenges. And then I'll present PEMS, which is a study I did recently about in general, what's the people experience of mountain soundscape. And then I'll go into the Scottish Mountain Soundscape project, which is an ongoing project, which are now doing at the university. So what do we mean by soundscape? This definition comes from the 70s, where people, they started to look at the quality and the type of sounds and their arrangement in space and in time. Okay, this is a very first definition of soundscape. Then Schaffer in the 1977, this popularized this term, and this group of the Worldwide Soundscape Project, where there was a very human-centered approach to soundscape, where was studied the acoustic environment as perceived and understood and experienced by the people. And so how the soundscape also is impacting the relationship between the nature and how that increase or decrease also the ecosystem well-being and also the impact that this has in the daily living of the people. And then later on, it started to be expanded more and more the term of soundscape also in soundscape ecology that looks at how acoustic space, the acoustic space that could be studied within the frame of ecology in a broader sense. So when we look at soundscape, every soundscape in nature or in mountaineering environments is made of three different components. Geophony, which are natural sounds like wind, rain, and water, and many others that falls into this category. Biophonies, that are sounds from living organisms, and anthrophonies, that are sounds made by humans. And the combination of those are the three main groups that constitutes the whole soundscape. When we do soundscape studies, we might do them for many different reasons. Okay, one of them is raising awareness of the significance of soundscape and the impact of acoustic environments to us humans, but also to the ecosystem. So, for example, the impact of the traffic of a road nearby a natural reserve, what impact does it have to the wildlife, for example, or vice versa? What is our impact to long exposures to natural sounds rather than traffic sounds and so on? So there is the need to raise awareness on the significance of the soundscape in which we live in. The research and documentation, the soundscape to create an archive. So there is our research and documentation process of different environments, which is one of the projects I'm leading on as well in Scotland, in documenting different soundscape. In my case, is the mountaineering environments. And then soundscape preservation, for example, looking at the threat of urbanization and industrialization threat to natural environments, not only from an ecological point of view, but also the disturbance that this causes to the wildlife and the also experience of people living there. Developing an acoustic ecology to study the relationship between all living beings and how sound affect the relationship between living beings. Educational outreach, so from an educational point of view, to educate people, but also to educate policymakers about the importance of soundscape and acoustic design when we design green spaces, urban planning, and many other areas. And then, of course, creating tools and techniques to do all this work behind it, from building hardware to record soundscape to software to analyze it, and research methods and so on. The application of soundscapes can be, as I just anticipated a second ago, in environment planning and design, where there is a urban or rural areas, where there is noise management, acoustic zoning, planning green spaces, where commonly when we think about green spaces is to decrease the level of pollution, but with it comes also decreasing the level of loudness of many machineries or cars passing by and so on. So during the planning design of environment of especially urban areas, noise management, acoustic zoning, and so on is incredibly important. Environmental conservation, so looking at the biodiversity, monitoring the soundscape of different biodiversity and ecosystems, where we can use acoustic indexes that can tell us about the how healthy or less is an ecosystem. Public health, looking at the impact of noise and machinery in hospitals, for example, because hospitals in some departments can be quite noisy, from respiratory machines and so on. And so creating an acoustic pleasant environment also for patients can be important for the recoveries of certain disease or status, like, for example, people suffering from anxiety or other conditions, or using sound as an active means of therapeutic environment to actually decrease level of anxiety, for relaxations, and many other methods. And then cultural heritage and tourism, where there have been also recent studies this year and the years before, where that looked at the impact of the whole experiential flow of being in a park, whether there is in a park that might be or might not be contaminated by sounds that are not native for that environment. So there is lots of research in the impact of the experience of tourists of certain sites. And then, of course, in educational research, in interdisciplinary studies between acoustics, ecology, psychology, and sociology. And then from here comes the whole public awareness through publication seminars like today and many others. Of course, in architecture and interior design, to create acoustic comfort and through soundscaping, not only in someone's home or very small environments, but for example, it comes to my mind also in airports, where not only with the addition of sounds coming from the speakers, natural sounds, but also by actually modifying the structure of an airport. A few weeks ago, I remember I had a connection in Doha Airport in Qatar, and in that airport there is an actual forest inside. There are plants and palms and so on. And the presence of this vegetation changed the whole soundscape as well, and the way people would behave there, because people would approach this area as a means of is a relaxing area, so everyone went way quieter compared to many other areas of the same airport. So, and then transport planning with noise barriers, wildlife protection, so the monitoring and triangulation of sounds to detect passage and direction of different animals and the presence of them, virtual reality and gaming, creating audio assets that can be embedded in these environments, and then policy and regulations, legislation standards for making sure that we are in a healthy environment sound-wise. We are not exposed to incredibly noisy or sound and so on. So how do I evaluate all these? There are different methods. There are subjective methods and objective methods. The subjective methods refers more to the individual, to the personal how each individual interpret the auditory environment. Instead, the objective methods refers to more analytic methods and objective ones. So when we come to subjective soundscape evaluation, there are different methods, which could be questionnaires and surveys of different natures that ask about the pleasantness of an environment, for example. Interviews that can give you some more data, more meaningful data compared to questionnaires, because you have the opportunity, of course, to chat to a person, to ask follow-up questions and to go deeper into issues. Soundworks, like the one we did yesterday, sorry, and where we use the ISO 12913 acoustic soundscape series, which is an ISO standard that looks at, that provides a protocol to evaluate soundscapes. And this is a questionnaire that's asks us, it's a series of questions, and then there are all frameworks to analyze this data. But again, although we have a very precise framework, the data still come from an individual, so it's still very subjective. Then we have focus groups, where we do interviews and focus groups, and we talk to a group of people together. Then diary studies, where a single person goes around and collects sounds and keeps a diary of what the person hears and the impressions. Semantic differential scales are studies where people are presented a series of scales to rate the soundscape and compares them. And there is all a way to compare them. I don't go too deep now. And then experiential sampling methods. Here, in using this method, there is a combination between different scales or different that are used also in other methods. But here, there is a focus also on the emotional perception of the soundscape. So the emotions that each individual feels when doing that evaluations, when listening to those sound environments. And then there is visual auditory representation. So here there is also the presence of visual stimulus for so images and videos to the person to evaluate the soundscape. And then there is the whole acoustic ecology. Again, then the objective soundscape evaluations instead are evaluations that we do by the means of computers. Really, we do the recordings, we analyze sound recordings, looking at the sound level, the frequency analysis, temporal analysis, spatial analysis. This is very important to me because looking at the spatiality and where sound comes from and capturing acoustics also of the place can tell us also about a lot about the environment and the scale of the environment around it. Source identification, for example, in identifying certain bird species or bats or any other animal, really. Acoustic indexes, which we touched on before. Waveform analysis. Psychoacoustic metrics are really important because it gives us let's say, an objective idea of how people hear, because we do all a series analysis based on perception of how the human perceives sound. And then sound recording and playback to subjects, and computer simulations and modeling. There is all a branch of research that also tries to model soundscapes also for the generation of new soundscape in the field of VR and gaming. Long-term monitoring, which is applied a lot in conservation and restoration to know about the presence of certain animal, or when a certain species is reintroduced in an habitat, how this species is moving, how is procreating, and so on. And then environmental noise assessment standards. So the challenging soundscape studies are still many. For example, inaccurate sound measurements and data analysis is still a bit of a challenge there. Environmental challenges, addressing also noise pollutions and its source, and societal challenges, balancing diverse perception and needs within a community, because it's also very cultural, our perception of sound. There are countries where the perception of sound changes a lot. For example, in Japan is a very quiet country, I noticed. More or less, it depends where you are, I guess.
Noises created by humans are low, but there
Yeah.
are the cicale.
Yeah, yeah. The wildlife is very loud.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's noisy.
Yeah, this is thing that I noticed. The sound made by people is incredibly quieter compared to Europe and the States, and the Western world is much more quieter. When I did exit from the airport in Tokyo, the first time when I've been there, are there people around me? Also at the metro, having lived in London, the metro is incredibly noisy. You had to shout to someone next to you to talk to them. Instead, at the I would be scared to answer the phone. Yeah, so it's very cultural as well. What we are exposed to on a daily life. And in the mountains, there are many, much more sets of issues which come from logistics. If you want to do in situ, let's say, evaluation, bringing people there, out there. Luckily, here at UNIMONT, guys, you are incredibly lucky, which just go in the afternoons like we did yesterday, and it was wonderful. But it's not always, unfortunately, like that. Picture doing a soundscape evaluation in Malta for an institution in London. It will be quite tricky. And then safety, finance, but not only, also weather. In Scotland, the weather is a huge challenge. Also in Italy lately. Yeah. And it's a very big challenge. Last week was still snowing in some part of Scotland, and a few days after we had sunny days, and it's very unpredictable. So you cannot really plan when and how to do soundscape recordings. So now I want to expose a bit to this new to a survey to the people experience of the mountain project, which basically is the issue that I try to tackle, but is an issue that I will keep going investigating, is the lack of soundscape studies on people's perception of mountain soundscapes. Apology. There are a lot of studies in soundscapes in urban environments, rural environments, hills, but there is fairly little in the mountains. So to start with it, I wanted to have a general idea of what is the general perception of mountain soundscapes. So, and how, especially, how these contributes to fundamental mountain skills, such as navigation, safety, and the understanding of the environment. Because being a mountain lover myself, I always ask myself, can actually sound tell me how to actually get home? If in poor visibility or something. But of course, I've got a very subjective view of the issue. So I start asking people about it. So what I did an online survey where I asked about some demographic information, mountaineering background to understand who were the participants of the survey, and then how soundscape contributes to perception, navigation, risk assessment, and the understanding of the surroundings. So we had a total of 219 participants from 27 different countries. 60% were males, 39% were females, 1% were non-binary. 4% declared to have moderate hearing loss, 8% mild hearing loss, and 88% had no hearing loss. And 17% of the participants were audio professionals. When we asked about the practice activities, hiking, walking, mountain walking, and photography were the most popular activities. Then we see that there is mountaineering, trekking, wildlife watching, scrambling, indoor climbing, abseiling, and more activities with less people practicing until hang gliding, where we had one only participant practicing it. Then we asked if there were some pro-mountaineer participants. With pro, we meant instructor, guide, or sponsored athlete. And most of them were guides, mountain guides, for hiking, hill walking, and trekking. And then there were mountaineers, people that do abseiling, wildlife watching, scrambling, trad climbing, indoor climbing, and so on. So, and then we ask them, but why do they go to the mountains as well? What's their interest to understand better our participants? So many go to seek solitude and peace, just to disconnect and be on their own and to appreciate the sense of to connect with themselves. Others look at they love going to the mountains more for the physical and mental challenges, so to prove themselves or to kind of put themselves, let's say, at the edge of their capabilities and as a way to learn to overcome them from a physical and mental point of view. And then connecting with nature and with the surrounding environments. So to have a deeper connection with nature and to escape from the daily urban life. Others do go for fitness and well-being as a form of sports or recreation, and for their own physical well-being and mental well-being as well. And then as a social community aspect, because when you're out in the mountains, you find yourself also having to solve issues sometimes that really issues that means you go back home together with other people. And so there is this social and problem solving aspect, a continuous aspect of doing things together and also learning how to trust someone else. We received many of those comments. And then finally, for personal passion and connection to mountaineer sports and the whole mountaineering environment. Then we asked how they defined the soundscape, and many comments were about the aural environment, about the immersive experience that you get that helps you to be immersed in the landscape. Many said is the equivalent of the landscape that you can hear. A combination of sounds, subjective perception, a sensory experience. This is incredibly important, this last one, because when we are out there, it's a cross-modal experience of the mountains. We see them, we smell them, we touch them, and we hear them. And also yesterday during the sound walk, I learned to appreciate also the smell of certain leaves, and it changes the whole experience of being out there and how that combines with the soundscape. So the sensory experience is incredibly important, which is one of also the challenges, I'll go a step backwards, of assessing soundscape, because the soundscape in the actual place is not detached from the actual reality of the place. You experience everything when you are there. So assessing soundscape in a laboratory environment is incredibly difficult. And the ecology and the validity of the results can be debatable sometimes, because someone might ask, yeah, but then the experience of actual being there is different, which is true. So now we are also trying to find a way to assess soundscape in a remote way, because taking hundreds of people to the mountains is not always feasible, I wish, but it is not, unfortunately. So the soundscape rating of, in general, they rated about 39.92 over 5. And people that had rated the mountain soundscape very high, they all talked about natural elements like wind, water, bird songs, wildlife. They talked about a feeling of tranquility, immersion in nature, connection with the environment, and the absence of human-made noise. This was incredibly important, even especially traffic airplane, which is another issue there. And the people that rated gave mid ratings around 3 stars. Talked about the appreciation for the natural environment, okay, And but also started to mention about the impact of strong winds and disruption from human activities. So here it becomes very context dependent. So many said it does depend how the soundscape is. And people rated very low. They talked about intrusive human-made noise, traffic airplanes, loudspeakers of people going hiking up the mountains, overcrowding, and lack of natural elements. Surprisingly enough, many of the low ratings came from people that also declared that they often go to incredibly beautiful places like the Dolomites and so on, but they said the soundscape is awful and the whole experience becomes awful because you have hikers coming up the mountains with massive loudspeakers next to you. So the whole point of being there is suddenly disrupted and you are like, where am I? Am I like in the city or I'm up in the Dolomites? So when we asked them to rate different sounds, we saw the natural sounds were rated way much higher and the human-made sounds were rated way much slower. Interestingly, avalanches are silence. Many mentioned silence as well, although silence does it exist? Then it becomes a bit philosophical. But anyway, let's not go there. But many perceive the absence of animal sources or water sources as silence without considering the movement of air. That was a common answer. Interesting was the case of avalanche and rockfalls because they are often associated with not a nice event, a place where you don't want to be there. So it's more with what the sound means and what's the cause of the sound rather than the sound itself. It's because being in an avalanche and a rockfalls is not nice at all. So it's related as a very poor sound. And then they said about footsteps, people rated very low, even their own footsteps, clothing, machinery, aircraft, and traffic. So when we ask them, when looking at the data, we also ask them to tell us about the frequency with which they hear a sound. With frequency, I mean how often they listen a sound. And it seems that there is a kind of a linear trend between the two with some outliers, where it seems, I don't say it is, the more frequent a sound is heard, and the more the higher it is scored, with some exception for wildlife, insects, and echoes. Then we looked at sounds contributing to navigation. Most of them pointed out water sounds and wind, followed by animal sounds, traffic noise, and fairly equal all the other sounds. And when we asked to comment on that, they said about the sound might help to orientate themselves and location. For example, in poor visibility, which is Scotland Uplands very often, you are suddenly in the middle of a cloud or a snowstorm, a complete whiteout situation is fairly common. And you see some landmarks on the map that there are rivers or there are fissures, but you cannot see them, but you can still hear a river or a waterfall. Or if you hear, for example, traffic sounds, which in some areas might be possible because of the echo that comes from the valley, you can kind of detect, realize where the traffic noise come from, and suddenly you can kind of reorientate slightly your map and try to understand where you are. So route finding as well. And many interestingly talked about coordination with the group, because also the human voice is important, communicate with each other. And this is still part of the soundscape of whistles and any other sound that is used at the mountains to communicate. When we asked them about sound contributing to safety, many talked about wind, rockfalls, and avalanches, water, thunders, animal sounds, and human activities. when we asked to comment about it, they talked about the sound of avalanches and rockfalls, because sometimes you can hear a rockfalls coming from above you, but you cannot really see it. Because if you are under a quite fairly steep and overhang sections, you cannot really see what's above you. Or if there are hikers above you in some sections of a mountain, you can hear a rock falling way before you can see right in front of you. Also from about avalanches, if someone triggers an avalanche and you are down the slope rather than an avalanche is still fairly far away, you might have some chances to just run away. If you are facing the back from the avalanche, probably you still don't feel the stability of the terrain because the avalanche didn't move yet close enough. Environmental conditions, such as changes of wind speed, direction, or water sounds or waterfalls, because sometimes there is vegetation covering some streams of water that even a simple sleep on a rock might cause you breaking your leg and being stuck there if you're alone. So that's quite important. And then terrain stability. Many talked about the sound of the ice when going in glacier traveling or snowpack conditions, because the snowpacks, I don't know if you ever experienced it, when you go on top of it, might sound sometimes, or ice might sound a bit hollow, or might have different sounds that might indicate that underneath there is nothing or there is water running. And so you will just collapse on top of it, which is not a nice thing either. So the presence of snow bridges that are enough to hold a few meters of snow, but not enough to hold a person on top of it. Or if you are rock climbing, one of the things that many times climbers do is knocking on the rock to see if it's actually attached to the main block of rock. Because if it's hollow, it's got a low frequency sound, most of the time you go with your whole weight on top of it and the all just comes off. And so knocking on rock sometimes it might seem silly, but it can help a lot there. And then animal presence, the potential of some potential aggressive animals, for example, which some might not seem aggressive at first, like cows in Scotland, which at the beginning they might seem very nice and incredibly nice animals, but if there are calves, the females might be very aggressive. And I found myself in some situation where, okay, I maybe change my own routes, but or human activity. Okay, if there is hunting in hunting areas and you are not aware that it's hunting season, am I already hearing the sounds of gunfires and shouts might be incredibly important. Or also someone else shouting rock below or other climbing calls to say that something is falling is still part of the soundscape. And then again, communication with the group, which is incredibly important. So sounds that contributes to understanding the mountain environments. Water again, it seems one recursive sound. Livestock, wind, bird sounds, and rockfalls, and then there are all others sounds. When we asked to comment, they talked about environmental awareness. Okay, like I was saying, yeah, I saw a note for myself about yesterday. There, but about the presence of certain wildlife, indicating the biodiversity of a certain environment, okay, and how healthy or not an ecosystem is. So if you know that there is meant to be a certain wildlife, the lack of that wildlife might tell you, oh, there is an issue here. What's the cause of this wildlife not being present here? What has happened in the environment, in the whole ecosystem? And then what I was talking yesterday about the soundwalk about the red pine, special awareness about if you in different places in quarries or concave areas, or especially when you are in between big faces, listening to the echo and the reverb of certain and the acoustics of certain environments can tell you about the scale of the environment in which you are in. And cultural and land management sound can tell you also a lot. So provides informations about the sounds of the presence of mountain farming activities or not, for example, or man-made sounds, okay? Or as many people indicated, silence about the altitude and the remoteness, because as you go higher and higher, the feeling of being in a silent environment increases more and more because of the lack of wildlife, of course. So from this first survey, the main results were that there are positive aspects that relates to natural sounds for people, but there are also negative aspects and related to man-made sounds. So it's kind of an image of that we should all be more aware on the sounds that we introduce when we are in this environment as well. And then auditory perception is certainly important for navigation, safety, and understanding of the surroundings. But one of the things that I noticed that this came also with the experience of being out in the mountains, especially practicing certain activities like rock climbing or mountaineering, more extreme activities of being in high altitude. So instead now, to finish, I'll talk to you about the Scottish Mountains Soundscape project, and especially recordings. We will hear recordings I made in the past week in the Sky Cooling Ridge, which is this that we can see. So Scotland is a very interesting, very different environment than the mountains that we used to have, that are common in Italy and in Europe. Consider that the highest mountain in the UK is Ben Nevis, which is 1,340 meters. We have car parks at that height. I don't know, how high are we? What's the height of Edinburgh, more or less? Yeah, 700 in Scotland. You are already more than halfway up a mountain, one of the highest mountains. So it's very different. But the difference is that it's really one of the biggest challenges, weather. In winter, it feels to be in a proper alpine environment because there is so much snow, ice, and wind.
It can be dangerous to go up to the.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yeah, the weather changes incredibly quickly. I was saying, I can't remember who, but even during summer, when I go, even for a simple hike, which is a very straightforward path, no ridges, no rock, just very nice grassy environment, I always carry all my full Gore-Tex waterproof, storm shelter, first aid kit, everything, because anything can happen at any time. Also, phone connection is very little. It feels very remote. So I've got always with me also a satellite enriched device with me. And so it feels to go to an expedition because you are on your own in an environment that can change at any time. And if your battery goes off, you are there, you and the map and the compass. And that's it. So it feels like to be, I don't know where. Instead, in Italy, in Spain, or in the Alps, you get phone reception much everywhere nowadays, and you meet people fairly often. And so I think about it. This picture is from an island, a little island next to Scotland, and you start from sea level, from 0 to 1,100 meters in the range of 3 kilometers. So actually, rock climbing and hiking in Scotland, I find it way much harder than in Italy, because the ascents and descents, you can end the day having done easily 1,500, 1,600 meters of ascent of positive gain. So it's just very different, the type of environment. So this is my current ongoing project, and what I'm trying to do is to develop adopt an in situ laboratory, to do in situ and laboratory soundscape assessment to then find the optimal way to do it in a lab situation. So what I'm doing is in situ evaluation, like we did yesterday afternoon with the students, where they filled a questionnaire and we did this activity. Laboratory soundscape, and later I'll show you a video with how we do it. And field recording, so me going out there, capturing these sounds, and then doing soundscape assessment in the lab. And the creation of a data set with modeling using artificial intelligence to help me out in analyze these hours and hours of gigabytes of recordings. So the first in situ soundscape assessment, it was in the Cairngorms National Park, which is in the center, let's say, of Scotland. Here we have Edinburgh here, the bottom right. Next to it there is Glasgow, that are the main two cities of Scotland, and then up here we have the different national parks. Here we have the Loch Lomond National Parks, here the Cairngorms, and then here we have Skye and many other areas. So we did a sound walk in the Monolith Mountains in the west of the Cairngorms. And the sound walk was fairly long. It was a fairly big day. It was about 7 hours, 8 hours hike. And we did a first stop at about 425 meters, and then a second stop at the top of one of these mountains, which is about 920 meters. As you can see, fairly low of altitude, but very diverse in terms of environment. So the settings, we were in, there were 3 participants, 4 actually, from the Edinburgh Mountaineering Club, of which I'm part. That we were 2 males and 2 females. And we used microphones, which was used also yesterday, which is a Zilia microphone and an iPad to record the soundscape. This is the microphone. It's a fairly particular microphone which has 19 microphones in one. That helps to capture the spatial aspects of the sound. So when we render the audio, we can actually recreate the same, as very similar sonic environment, also respecting the directionality of each sound, where the sound comes from. Which is important because for the richness of the data, the spatial accuracy of data, because having the sound of a bird in movement is important also from where comes from to where it goes, and the trajectories, and also we can try to analyze also direction of the wind, where it's stronger from one side or less. And also in euros will be about 2,000 euros, more or less. Yeah, and then it's connected to an iPad, standard iPad. And then the nice thing of this microphone is that we can do rendering also for VR application, immersive applications, 360 applications. We can render the audio in mono, stereo, binaural, different type of formats. So we one unique setup, you can do much more. And this was the optimal solution I found, because carrying a lot of kit for 7 hours up the mountains, it becomes a bit of a challenge after a while. So I did normalize the audio, so the levels might be a bit quieter or loud. I try to keep it consistent. Just a little disclaimer for people here also on Zoom, but everyone should be able to hear. So the first stop was here at the west of Craignac. I'm really sorry with the pronunciation of places in Scotland, that they are all in Gaelic. For me, it's a nightmare. I saw that before connected, there is also a colleague of mine with which I share the office, and every time I go back after a weekend, he asks me, "So where have you been this weekend?" I said, "Can I show you on the map?" Because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They're incredibly hard to pronounce. So there are some that there is the English translation of it, but for many, even reading a map in Scottish is it's fairly a challenge. But if you know some Gaelic, it can help, because the name itself tells you about the description, about the story of the actual place. So if you know some Gaelic, you can actually have, already looking at the map, okay, from the map you might know about how the territory looks like, but you have additional information on top of it.
It's the same here with traditional name.
Yeah, I bet. So I'm not Scottish, and I'm not by any means, I don't know Gaelic, but I'm trying to kind of learn some of it. Which is not, the pronunciation is fairly challenging. Anyway, the first stop we did it at an altitude of 425 meters after about 43 minutes. So everyone was fairly fresh. And this was the actual environment, or it looked like. It was an incredibly nice, bright morning next to a river coming down the valley. And we were heading to this peak here and then traversing behind and keep going on the plateau of different peaks. And this is how it sounded like. Sorry. I say it again. It was a fairly consistent sound of water flowing. And while we were there, I gave the participants a questionnaire to fill about the soundscape that they were listening to. The second sound, the stop, was in Kernisgulen, if I pronounced it well. I'm sorry for the Gaelic, which means rocky hill of the basket. That's the meaning of it. Every top has got all kind of history and so on. And has got an altitude of 920 meters. And this second stop was made after 5 hours and 55 minutes from the start. So after 6 hours of walking. And this was the how it looked like. The weather had changed quite a lot. It was not looking nice anymore, and this is how it sounded like. So yeah, as you can hear, it was way much windier up there. It felt fairly cold as well. The temperature up there dropped of about 7-8 degrees at least, if no more. And with the wind gusts, it would be even colder. When they rated the two locations, the first location was rated way much more pleasant than the second one. And but it was rated, the second one was rated way much more eventful, where participants looked at perhaps interpret the wind as a sort of event that will make the soundscape much more dynamic in that sense. So when we do the ISO evaluation, basically, as we are here, there are all a series of scales that they rate, which is eventful and uneventful, chaotic and calm, monotonous and vibrant, and annoying and pleasant. And based on this rating, there is a whole formula that helps us to calculate these charts. Then we ask them about also, the ISO also asks different questions, like how often would you visit this place again? How appropriate the sound is to the surroundings, how unpleasant is there, how loud is there, and overall, to what extent is the present surroundings sound environment appropriate for the present place? And participants said that they will visit more often the first place rather than the second, and found it way much more unpleasant, the second place, than the first one. But this is not a field that is not only about the sound, because if we look at comments, first of all, we need to take into account that the first location, the first assessment, they did it only after 43 minutes of walking. Instead, the second one after 5 hours and 55 minutes. So perhaps also the emotional state, tiredness, and the whole general feeling of a person that played a part. And then in the first hike, in the first stops, people wrote about happy moment with friends, great week, weather is improving, which then it turned out not to be, actually. One participant said just wrote calm, another one peaceful, simple, and calm, and another one calm, happy, and pleasant at home. So the feeling of being at home. Instead, when we were at the summit plateau, after a few hours being exposed to the wind, people said, "Oh, it's a very long, windy day. Wind can make me feel cold and the surrounding less pleasant, and wild fear of getting cold, because being cold out there is not always nice." I mean, anyone can get, in Scotland, it's still fairly common to get hypothermia even in summer. It can happen because the weather changes so quickly. So going from extremely hot to extremely cold. So all this feeling might have impacted to the actual assessment of the soundscape. So it's really to contextualize, and this is another reason why it's still a bit hard to actually do soundscape evaluation in a lab situation. Because many of these aspects of the context are extracted from the actual context in which the sounds were recorded. For example, in a lab, it's not windy, it's not cold, unless someone goes there with the aircon and tries to simulate the actual environment. So one of the things that I would like to do is also to extend this ISO standard to capture all those informations about mountain environments, so to adapt it to a mountain environments where they feel like weather informations and also how sound can contribute to orientation, safety, and understanding, I think is important for a study of a soundscape in the mountains. So these are one of the things I'm also looking at. So these are the recordings were made in the island of Skye, which is in the northwest of Scotland, about 5 hours drive from Edinburgh. And in the island, which is the map on the right, I did some recording on the Cullins Range, which is the image I showed you before of the skyline, and then on the Old Man of Storr, which is an iconic place, a landmark in Scotland, which is also the one in the flyer for the event. So this was the first recording was made in the ferry pools, which is a very common, is a touristic hotspots. There are these waterfalls and then creates these little pools, and many people go there to take pictures and enjoy the place. This is how it looked like. The weather was very grim, although it was a very not a nice weather. Very Scottish, exactly. And during Brideshead, a very sunny days is stunning. But when some clouds comes in, it can really turn out not to be pleasant. But still a very nice place to be. So maybe if we lower the sound. Sorry, this was a bit louder. It might be my fault. It might be. Do I go backwards? Do I try again? So there is a very loud, they were just very loud. Around the And then the second one was a bit higher up. So the ferry pools are down here, are higher up towards the quarry, so towards the mountains. We kept walking upwards. And this is how instead sounded like. As you can see, the weather changed again completely. Okay. And then the last recordings I'll let you listen is from the inaccessible pinnacle, which is rocky features in one of the Munros. The Munros is a way to classify mountains in Scotland, the highest mountains above 3,000 feet, which is about 945 meters ish. I cannot remember exactly, but it's a series of mountains. And the inaccessible pinnacle is one of the iconic ones, which look like this. So this is the actual pinnacle. This is the whole ridge. So you come through the quarry, you keep climbing up, and then you can also climb it and upsail from the other side. So the climb starts here. You climb up, and then you upsail down from this other side. And here is a fairly bottleneck, let's say, for people that go it because they do it because there are always queuing people to go up and down, up and down. I see. Yeah. As you can hear, there is wind, but here there is the presence of people and rock climbing gear and so on, which changes a lot. Which is just, although there are fairly during, if you follow a path, there are still over the day there is the same amount of ish on the path. In some areas there is more than density of people because of the type of activities they are doing and so on. So these, if you know for example, you know the area and there is where there are more concentration of people, and you are down here in the ridge, you don't really, there are bank of clouds, you don't know where you are going. Potentially, you say, oh, I hear climbers, and this is the only spot where people will use climbing gear. I can suddenly kind of reorientate myself and understand where I am in the whole ridge. Because navigating this whole ridge can be quite tricky, to be honest. Yeah. And then one more, the Old Man of Storr, which is a very iconic landmark in Scotland. This is the Old Man of Storr. Storr is the hill just behind, and this is the Old Man. And it's a very popular hotspot, as you can see from the pictures. Up here, there is a viewpoint, incredibly popular. And this is what's the soundscape. So if you look at the flyer, at the image of the flyer, which is this one here, it seems an incredibly peaceful and nice image. But this is how it sounds like on a summer day.
Very tired dog, I think. Oh.
Know if you captured at the very end, there was someone coming by with a little radio. So radios and loudspeakers, unfortunately, are common are also in Scotland from tourists. And so the next future steps is to take all these, because those are 2D images now, but they are actually 360 images. So I have 360 images of the places in which I did the recording, as 360 audio recordings. And then the idea is to now invite people to do the same soundscape evaluation in VR. So looking at the space in VR and listening to the sounds, and see also what's the impact of not having all the actual feeling of the wind, the smell, and so on, how that impact instead the soundscape evaluation. And this is how it looks like in VR. I should precise, this is a project that some students helped me out to put together, third year students, some brilliant ones. Yeah. So the credit is not all mine here. Also students Palo as well. Here there are, every participant can read the instructions on how to use the system and then enters inside the system. And then design this VR situation with a test environment. It's not a mountaineering environment, obviously, but it's just a test environment. And then the whole survey that they will do in a normal situation on pen and paper. Here, in a second, they will do it in VR with the controller, so they don't have to take off the headset to do they can still be always in the VR environment, because otherwise there would be always some distractions. And this is the questionnaire, and all the informations are stored in the headset, including the movement of the person, so we can analyze also what the people were listening to and how they move inside the environment. So we can also track a bit the behavior of the person while listening the soundscape. And Yeah, there are different questions based on the ISO standard that I was talking about before. Yeah, I can fast forward it. So all a series of scales that they rate to rate the soundscape. Allowed this year, many other questions. And then this all the type of sounds that they hear about. For example, water, birds, and so on. And then I'll fast forward a bit. And then at the end of the questionnaire, they just exit their experience. And this is just the next future steps in the next following months, what I will be doing with all these recordings. And then, so the future works, what I would like to work on is also about creating a mountain soundscape dataset, which has started for VR laboratory soundscape evaluation, acoustic and psychoacoustic analysis for mountaineering environment, looking at geophony, biophony, and anthrophony, and how these interact as well in the whole environment. Also looking at ecosystems, really, and what this means for the ecology of a certain areas. Soundscape modeling and design, as also part of my work is on sound design applications for VR environments. And all these to have an understanding of the sound of the mountaineering environments, an interaction between the soundscapes and the environment and the wildlife, the human presence, weather, and the climate, how also the sound change based on the climate changes and the weather changes. And potential auditory feedback as a means of navigation safety and tool for mountaineers and rescue teams. And that is me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now questions, comments. Also from Raymond, yes, from the chat or okay.
So we saw that clearly is a cultural bias connected to the ideas of mountains. So how do you deal with that when asking to people what kind of sounds they perceive? Because you mentioned before that they fail to perceive, because maybe they connect the ideas of mountains more with nature, birds, animals, and water, but they might fail to perceive completely noises that really are there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important question. And at the moment, I don't have a way to do it. Take into account that there might be cultural notation with some sounds rather than others. Like, for example, for pro mountaineers can be a rock fall of an avalanche because you've been involved in one. So as soon as you hear one, it can really trigger not really nice memories. And I've received comments about that as well. Whether instead, if you talk to people, like yesterday I was talking to that artist, the sculptor, can't remember her name. Milan Berta, she instead breaks rocks and deals with rocks for an artistic purpose. So for her, is actually a means of artistic expressions and a way to create music. So the same sound can also be interpreted in many different ways, based not just about cultural, but also about your own background as an artist or not. So this is why it's more a subjective type of evaluation, which we take into account, but there is no, I don't have a way to actually to not to take into account or take into account what would be the weight of that comment. So, but it's definitely to take into account as to know. So now I'm trying to understand also, this is why during my survey I also asked, what are the mountaineers activities that you do? and how you rate every sound and why, which is very personal, I found. But yeah, that's a very good point.
If I can follow up connected to this, I imagine that when analyzing soundscapes for the purpose of preservation of biodiversity, of evaluating the human interaction with an environment, I guess you might have to study patterns and trends over time. So in this sense, if in this context, if you have to take into account how human people perceive a sounds, but if those people are not used to perceive that sounds, or if there are people that are not used to the environment at all, maybe it's people that never go to the mountain, and how can you reliably track the evolution over time of the sounds of a landscape if you cannot I mean, I don't want to say that you cannot rely on your senses, but
it's a very fair point
it's-
because I'm no ecologist or bonnet. I'm no person that studies animals. So there are AI that helps us to model, like is very capable of recognizing sounds, like birds and bats and species. So that's one of the tools, or the collaboration with someone who is a bird expert. So or you bring in the expert, or you bring some of the tools that can give you some results, but the human expertise is always there. And this is why I'm a UNIMONT as well, where there are the actual experts of the field. But yeah, and then there are many challenges because connected to long-term monitoring, not only about the recognizing the animals, is also where you can do it and cannot do it, the permission to actually plant microphones and not. So you actually also have to interact with people that manage certain estates or areas that you might not be aware of certain policies or regulations in place in the area. So there is an interaction with different bodies actually. So it's not a one-man job at all. Yeah.
thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you. No.
I just have a curiosity. So how did you arrive here? So, I mean, what's your background? How
That's
you... I mean, it's not something common to study soundscape.
no, no, it's not common. So there is a very long answer, but I'll keep it short. So the very short answer is that I love the mountains. I do rock climbing and many other sports related to the mountain environments, and I needed something to connect between my academic work and my personal passion. So this is the actual true answers, but there is a lot behind it. So my background is in contemporary music composition, and one of the things I didn't touch on here because it was not really the scope of the talk is that soundscape is also used by artists for soundscape composition. So in the 70s, the group of Schaffer and many others, the one I mentioned at the very beginning, some detached from the group and started to make music and to actually to extract a kind of, to find patterns in nature to actually transform into music, sound art installations. And so I studied soundscape in the first time, around 2009, 2008, in that context, in the context of music composition. So going out there, capturing sounds and organizing sound in a way that would be musically meaningful, like you would compose any music for any instrument, really. So that was the origin. And then I did digress on the many other paths, going through human-computer interaction design with musicians, developing interfaces, many other things in between, sound engineering and so on. And then I came back to it just last year. So that's a bit the trajectory I took. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Beside the you in the factors factor you have considered are the height and closeness to see, and was the echo like the related to the rock morphology or was taken into account somehow in your studies?
So
And,
yeah, this
how can influences your
yeah, this is a very good question because I'm now also doing. I will start late this summer to do this type of studies because also by experiencing the mountains, I noticed that depending on where you are, the altitude and the type of rock, it does impact, like any material in any acoustic environment. Also, apologies, the type of rock can do that because some of the rocks are softer, some are harder. Like in Sky, there is a type of rock in English called gabbro, which is a very rough rock, very compact, very solid, which when you put your hands on it, it looks like sandpaper. Rock climbing on it is sometimes is actually painful, but but it's very good for feet, for footholds, because you put your foot there, it never goes away. Your foot. But anyway, so, and the acoustics of the place changes a lot, especially if you're in the proximity of quarries, so these very concave areas. On the following days of those recordings, we had, by chance, while doing one of the recordings, there were two F-15s military jets passing by, and there was an incredibly strange echo, but incredibly loud. And weird enough, the more closer they would come, the not quiet, but very different was the sound, because we were receiving lots of the echo that we would hear from where they were far away compared to when the actual jet was close by. So the acoustic of the place definitely has an impact. I didn't do any test compared to difference of rocks with loud sounds, but by experience while climbing, different type of rocks do impact, because some rocks are more porous, or they are more soft or harder. Also the shape, if you are in a quarry, for example, or you are in a natural environment which is slightly more smoother. So yeah, it does impact the acoustic of the place like any other feature. Or if you are in a wood, wood tend to absorb sound rather than reflect sound like a rock will do. So you would have a much more sense of absorption of sound and environment which is way much quieter. Like if in the same corridor, well, would have been full of trees, wouldn't be as loud as in the situation. Like when in the sound recording of the climbers, from the pictures, we were quite far away, at about 50, 60 meters far from the climbers, but you could hear them incredibly well because of the reflections of the rock around it. So yeah, it does impact a lot. I don't have any study yet about that, but one of the studies I would like to do is also to study the acoustics of the place. So going there and taking pulse responses and other techniques to actually study those aspects. Yeah.
I remember to everyone is watching online that if they have some question, they just can raise hands or write it down in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's just someone saying hi.
Yeah.
No?
No questions? Oh, yeah.
My question is more broad, like your job. Do you think it's bringing something beneficial to society? What's the benefits of your job?
That's a very good question. Like many jobs in the academic sphere, it's not a common jobs. In many jobs. No, one of the things that I'm trying to bring some benefits is to raise awareness of listening to when we travel really around, especially when we do it for also for safety in the mountains. We rely on a lot on visual cues. But because it's our primary sense, is obvious. I do it as everybody does it on average. I don't say everybody in an absolute sense. but we should be way much more aware of it. This is one of the things. So raising awareness to pay attention to this. Also, through sound and sound recording, sound analysis, we can track and monitor a bit the ecosystem. So to bring my analysis of the health status of an ecosystem, and so then from that analysis, what we could do better or we should do better to keep the ecosystem healthy or for restoration purposes when we reintroduce a species. So how to analyze a species in those situations, and then also to then increase the chances of doing this type of analysis in a laboratory situation. So for me, it's important to study also way of doing it in a lab, because if we can do it there, we can also increase the chances that we can have better results, and so to have a more meaningful impact to the people. In terms of analysis, for me, it's also important to understand what's more meaningful to understand from the sonic environment, because if we have a way to analyze it, then also when I go and talk to people or publish about it, I can be more certain of what I'm talking about. Because now I cannot say a completely anecdote, but I don't have strong scientific proof, because of the lack of data. So now I'm in the process of collecting the data and analyzing them, because it's still, for a scientific impact, you have to have a fairly good amount of data and a very reliable method to analyze it. So we are still at the stage of actually collecting all this data, because they don't exist yet. So one of the job with all these recordings that are doing is also to capture this data, to create this data set, to actually then do the research and then lead it. It's just a first step. But it's a very fair questions, because by the end of the day, we receive also public funds to do research, which are taxpayers' money. So we have to do things for people. So this.
But I don't know if it's strictly related with your jobs, but we have in the last few years a lot of projects based on communication and storytelling, based on audio. So not just for climate change, but also for changes in general. So I don't know, the demographic changes for a city or a small town. There are a lot of projects based on the variation on the patterns. So one we spoke about that just before. Sergio Maggioni couldn't be here today because of an injury. We hope not something not relevant, but he, for example, he did an experimental project recording the sound of a glacier that it's dying. It's called A Suono in Estinzione. And in the last 5 years, I think this project tried to tell a lot of people outside the scientific field and make them prove and hear what is the sound of this glacier, because it's recorded in the Adamello glacier melting. It was brought to, I don't know, museums, malls, and it's quite shocking. And it's based on works like that.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you
Not a scientific one, but the field.
No, but also for sound design purposes, for example, and like the case of podcasts or entertainment and design, which might not seem a very scientific kind of area, but it does impact the daily life of many people interested in those technologies. My job as a lecturer is teaching sound design for video games, which is a huge industry in the world. Is bigger than the music and almost bigger than the music and the cinema put together. for example. So it does impact the life of many, many people. Studying all these methods, what Soundscape is also is more pleasant or less pleasant for people, can change also the sound design that we do for these applications, for example, in industry. So there are many applications. So as I was saying before, to create auditory environments in hospitals, which for some patients, especially for those that suffers from misophonia, which is an illness where sound impact to people that, at a psychological status, to the point that it can reverse to the physical status. So also paying attention to all these, to the soundscape of indoor environments is incredibly important. So this is the old branch, but I'm trying now to build this data set around the mountains because there is a lack of research around there. Yeah, but it's a very fair question. I really appreciate the question, actually. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So still thinking about raising awareness. I don't know if the people that you might listen to these sounds were just random people or part of the fields or scientific people that are interested in the field or not. I'm just really curious about what the response would be of the public when you make them listen to these noises. Would they just wake up from an unconsciousness and realize that life has sounds, for instance, or?
So when I try to raise awareness, is a funny one. For example, the example of yesterday during the sound walk, we had this sound walk with about 25 students from here. And as a researcher, when you do a questionnaire, you cannot bias the results. So, which means you cannot tell people what to do and how to behave during the experiment by any means. So my instruction were listen around yourself and complete the questionnaire. We did 2 stops. At the first stop, they were talking between each other, looking at the questionnaire, says, "Oh, what did you put there? What did you put there to this answer?" and so on. To kind of because the questionnaire was in English as well, so it was not the first language of many students. And instead, once they started to understand the purpose and the questions, and over time, the first 5 minutes was like they weren't doing the actual task, and then after a while they said, "Oh, but let's listen." So it got quieter and quieter and quieter. But the second walk, it was just them listening and so on. So at first, this is to say that at first, there is no real consciousness of the sound around us and how meaningful it is. Even when I started doing them myself, because I tested them on myself first. And it made me appreciate also to sit and just be there in the mountains, which was something that I would never do before. I would stop, have a bite, have a drink, look around, take some pictures. All right, let's keep going. Instead, there is a whole different way of appreciating the fact of being there and connecting way much more with the place where you are. And relying on visual feedback only, yes, you have instantaneously an idea of where you are, how beautiful it is or not beautiful, or whatever you feel about the place. But the fact of hearing, but being a temporal medium, something that evolves over time, and to appreciate it, to be there in silence over time, it kind of forces you to connect more and appreciate more the place. So I see this kind of change of behavior to people. This is one of the things. But at first, many are not really aware because it's something that we don't do. I was like this as well. It's something you don't do most of the time. So yeah. So yeah, this is kind of, I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah.
We reached a very long, but I cannot translate it. It's impossible. It's for you.
Okay, let's see.
Someone saying hi, but telling
Okay.
that they want to cooperate with you. It's not a question, it's a request. But
Okay, so
we have,
Francesca says that she's a researcher, URAC, researcher at the Institute for Alpine Environments. That she is doing a research on the sound and sound recordings in places where they do research, so alpine environments, I believe. And she started this research on the soundscape. So we should connect, Francesca. Send me an email.
we can give
I
you.
can type it here in the chat. Did I type it? Oh no, I'm used to the UK keyboard. Sorry. Is it this? Oh, there it is. I'm happy to share in the chat. There is no problem.
Okay.
That's it. So this is my email address for those that would like to connect with me. She does research on environmental humanities. Yeah. Ethnography is a huge part of this type of research because we deal with people and the presence of the people pose. Participating to the actual, so by producing sound, but also by expressing their opinion is incredibly important. And so yeah, thank you, Francesca. I guess she's disconnected, but yeah.
Not to be, no, it's, I was just saying that if you have to contact her, we have her
you
contact.
have a contact, okay. Yeah, but if for anyone that would like to contact me, this is my email address here. So at any time, really.
Okay, if anyone hasn't nothing to ask, we can
Wrap it up.
Yep. So thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time and your expertise.
Thank you,
And
everyone.
everyone. Thanks.